But again, we've got two fine public servants here tonight, and so many of you know them and know them so well. So I'll be brief in my introductions and just kind of cover the important things. We've got Speaker McCutcheon. Speaker McCutcheon and his wife Debbie have 2 children and 2 grandchildren. He's a former hostage negotiator and current member of the Tennessee Valley Smallmouth Bass Club. So these are the important things that we need to know about. Senate President Pro Tem Marsh and his wife Ginger have 2 children and 3 grandchildren. He is the proprietor of the Hotel Finial and also owner of a machine shop that manufactures and finishes firearm parts in Anniston, Alabama. So thank you both, welcome to you both, and thank you both for being here.
Thank you.
What we're going to try and do tonight is again, just have a real casual discussion, and I'll probably ask some questions for a few minutes, and then we're going to open it up to the audience, open it up to y'all, and see if there's anything you want to cover tonight. But I thought we'd start with this little piece of legislation that y'all handled the last couple of weeks. Figured out as good a place as any to start. And kind of how I want to think about this beginning is that there's an old saying that says that deadlines spur action. And so, you know, y'all have both worked on that bill, on that issue for so long. And, you know, Mr. Speaker, I know that at one point in time you sponsored infrastructure bills for years. And, you know, President Pro Tem Marsh, I know that you've had a study committee that you commissioned, and there's been a ton of investigation, a ton of stakeholders have been at the table, people from all around Alabama. So there's no shortage of work that the 2 of y'all have put into it. But, you know, Mr. Speaker, I'll ask you first. What do you think, given the fact that, you know, what I just said about how deadlines tend to spur action, what do you think it was that was the turning point this year? And what made it so critical to go ahead and achieve passage of that bill?
Well, I think this was a process. I think we had to get to the point to where we identified the issue for the people of Alabama, and we had to start the process of educating the public on the need. There was no doubt in my mind that when we took the Joint Transportation Committee, it's been almost 5 years now, around the state to all of the ALDOT districts of this state and had public hearings and talked about the issues that we were facing. And this was spurred from a reality that I saw is that our infrastructure was directly tied to economic development. It was obvious through the first A trip that we had, the money that was borrowed to try to fix things. We began to see the state in certain areas just explode because we were doing some projects with the infrastructure, and because of that, we saw our economy begin to move forward and grow. As I began to look at that first year, and then we began to take a serious look at where we were going and look at the needs that we had, it became obvious to me that if we were going to move forward in this state, we were going to have to fix our infrastructure problem. Then when you go back, there's a map hanging on my wall that was drawn back in 1991, and it was in preparation for the 1992 infrastructure funding bill that was passed. And when you look at that, there's a 4-lane highway system connecting to all of our major interstates in the entire state, north to south and east to west. And I'm sitting there looking at that one day, and I realized, and this was several years ago, and I realized that if we could have done that with the revenues that we thought we needed at the time, if we could have done that in today's business world, we would have a lot of areas of this state that are high unemployment areas, that are government-dependent counties. They could have had jobs there, they could have had industry come in there and recruit people. But because of the infrastructure, they weren't able to do that. So it was obvious to me that we had to do something for the sake of our economy. And people talk about the tax at the pump. I like to look at it as an investment in our state, not just for the next 4 years, or not just for the next year, but for my children's sake and your children's sake. This vote on this bill, in my opinion, was probably one of the most productive, forward-thinking acts that the legislature has done in a long we made a decision not only for us today, but we made a decision for the future.
Well, that's really interesting, Mr. Speaker, how you talk about the future. I know both of your families, and I think there's probably a high likelihood that at some point in time, your grandchildren are going to be members of the legislature. So, Senator Marsh, I've got a scenario for you. Fast forward several years, the three of us are gone from this, and you've got a grandchild who's serving as a member of the legislature. And there's a day when the Rules Chairman walks out with the calendar and there's an infrastructure bill on it, and your granddaughter goes up there and she says, Senator Wagner, I think this bill, she says, Senator Wagner, I think this bill is unnecessary because of the work that my grandfather and his colleagues did. Why is that the case? Or what is it in this bill that prepared us for the future?
Well, and I want to say that the speaker's right, this was a process, but the reason this bill went through 5 days, everybody in this room knows it wasn't rushed, is because the preparation had been done. Countless meetings, and in those meetings, how do we solve this problem, not only today, but long term? And to your question, is the index component, which had never been in 92, which was not in the bill, was the reason we had to come back and face this. A lot of thought through that process of what index to use. What's the best index? Is it conservative enough? I mean, we picked an index that I believe is extremely conservative. Quite honestly, if you had taken this index from 2003 to today, it had gone up 1 penny. So, I mean, it's a very modest index, but it's there. So I think I was so impressed by the amount of work that was done on this bill in preparation, and because of that, our colleagues were well informed. Now think about it. This thing went into the House with all this information from the countless meetings we had. The bill was put together. I think there was one amendment put on the floor, none in committee. Came to the Senate, no change. Well, there didn't need to be any changes because it had all been thought out. Everything from what is infrastructure, what would an index look like, what's the situation with the ports of Mobile. Everything was thought out through the process, and that's why and I'm telling you, that's what's going to happen. And I'll tell you what else I believe is going to happen. You're going to see the same thing. I believe you're going to see major education reform in the state because of all the meetings that have taken place to be in preparation to move this state forward. Preparation is the key. That's what was done, and our colleagues did the right thing, and those in the room, and you talk about public servants, there's a lot of them in this room, and I thank each and every one of them.
I think that awareness that you both created has been impressive. I know, Mr. Speaker, for example, the mayor of Huntsville spoke in terms of one of the things that surprised me is obviously he was advocating for his own area. At the same time, he recognized other areas of the state, like the Seaport, Alabama Seaport, and how that affects the whole state. Was there any particular area where you were surprised about where there was awareness in speaking with your constituents or stakeholders? Was there any particular issue, any particular area where people were surprised that was part of the infrastructure package, or that there was, in fact, a need in Alabama?
I don't know, Tim, I don't know if I could just pick out one certain area. I do think that there was an obstacle out there that we had to get over from a concern of that we needed to get the information out to the mayors of our cities, county commission. We needed to get the information out there that we are a connected state. And I think that the Mobile Port issue helped move that forward, because people would ask the question, well, what does the port have to do with us up here in Huntsville, Alabama? And through that discussion, we were able to talk about the fact that we are a connected state. And if Mobile and the port does well, then it helps Huntsville, Alabama. We were able to look at the coal industry, the poultry industry, going out into the rural areas and talking to the chicken farmers, and the fact that we have trade agreements and we are exporting all all of these products out of that pool. It brought us together. I think that was one issue to help bring us together.
Good, good. Well, I want to switch gears here and talk about another issue that is no less important for a lot of the people in this room. And that's, I know there's been a lot of discussion about ethics reform. And, you know, I know that the task force that studied, led by Director Tom Albritton and Attorney General Steve Marshall, I know that they issued a report with some recommendations, and I know that there have also been a couple instances in one particular area of ethics reform, and that's some of the uncertainty surrounding principles. I know a lot of people in this room kind of care about that. You know, there was a criminal court of appeals opinion that basically put it in the lap of the legislature and said, hey, we need some more clarification on what is a principle and what are the responsibilities. And I know that the Ethics Commission very recently issued an advisory opinion involving principles of nonprofits. In fact, there was actually a second question in the request from the nonprofit organization asking if they could confirm that members of boards of nonprofits that are principals did not have to file quarterly reports. And the Ethics Commission just did not address that and did not address the question. And so I know that that's lingering out there as well. And so I just sort of wonder how it is you think that the legislature can help provide some certainty in that particular area as you kind of move forward with ethics reform.
There is no doubt that there's a lot of uncertainty in the ethics legislation. The commission was set up, looked over this, but in addition to that, both in the Senate and the House, in the Senate you've had Greg Albritton, in the House Mike Jones, working throughout the entire break on how do we address this. And remember, it's not about 140 legislators. There's 50,000 people in the state of Alabama affected by the ethics law. And I'm going to make a plea to my colleagues, some in this room tonight. If it's going to be fixed, we've got to fix it. And it's not going to get any easier. You got to face the issues. You've got to address it and realize this is about much bigger than the legislature. And so I'm hopeful, and it's affected economic development. There's a section there where the economic developers are having a problem keeping secrecy in the process of recruiting industries. We've got to address this, and I'm hopeful that we will address it this year. I know that both Senator Albritton, Representative Jones have been in conversation with the Attorney General and the Ethics Commission as well. So we're going down a path to try to get everybody on the same page. But we have got, trust me, ladies and gentlemen, we had best fix this, and it's got to be done.
You mentioned, Senator, the impact that this one law has that's about to expire for basically, essentially removing some red tape for site selectors, economic developers, that kind of thing. Yeah. And basically allowing them to work without having to register as lobbyists. There's some reasons why that's important for them in particular. But why is that important for the state?
Well, I mean, it's important for the state because we're competing with all the other states. And you can take an example. We passed a piece of legislation today to assist Polaris on the vehicles they build up in Huntsville. And Polaris is a great partner with the state of Alabama. We have many. But you've got to be able to negotiate with these people basically in secrecy, if you will. We generally give these economic development projects code names. Because we're competing against other states. And if we're not able to keep that degree of secrecy at that stage of the game, we're at a disadvantage to our neighbors. So, you know, this is something we've got to address, but I'm going to say this. That's a piece of it. And there's going to be an attempt by the business community and economic developers to pass the piece. But I think it's upon us to pass the big picture, solve all the problems, because you want as many people with you supporting you to make the changes, and every time you carve off a little piece, you lose some support. So, listen, I want to help everybody, but I'm committed to the big picture.
One of the economic development successes here in this area, in the river region, in recent years has been the Hyundai plant, south of Montgomery. And my wife, who's a 10th grade teacher, recently had one of her students graduate this past year and came back to her and said, I'm so excited that I've got a job down in Hyundai. College wasn't for him, he did not plan to go to college, but here he had secured this job that for him was, $25 an hour job with benefits. It was a great job. And to me, that's an example of one of those things that is at stake. But it also allows me to transition. As I said, my wife is an educator, and the three of us all have educators in the family, obviously. And so I do think that, we're able to recognize what an important function that is for the betterment of our state. So there's a couple things I want to get to. Governor Ivey certainly has her budget that's coming. But from your side of the street, Mr. Speaker, and I want to try and direct these questions to both of you, but what are you hearing from your education budget chairman on the budget?
Well, we're thankful for the good economy, and we're thankful for the revenue that we have to work with. One thing that we're holding the line on is that anytime that you have additional dollars coming into your budget, there's always those new programs, and people want to try to create something new out of the system. And a lot of the ideas are good ideas, but I go back to the year of 2006, 2007, when our state was experiencing tremendous growth, and we had one of the best budgets that we've had in a long time. And there were a lot of new programs put in place. And because of that, we spent every dollar that we had available. And then all of a sudden we hit the recession. Since that time, we've got the rolling reserve, which has been very helpful to us, keeping us out of proration and helping us manage our money better. With that in mind, we're trying to hold the line on the things that are working and trying to make sure that we support and build up those programs that have suffered in past years, such as the maintenance on our school systems, the buses, the new buses that we need to be buying, equipment, those kind of things. We're trying to shore up those programs along with those things that we know that have worked. And so when we talk about the budgets, the governor has been very good to sit down with us before the session starts and the Senate leadership and talk about our budgets and talk about her proposals. Because I can remember in years past where the executive branch would send us a budget after we'd gotten into session, and you're standing there thinking, where did this come from? But now we're negotiating and working on those budgets before the session starts. So we're all basically on the same sheet of music, if you will, working together. So out of the budgets, we're going to try to hold the line and put that money where we know it will benefit the system the best. And I know that Senator Marsh has done a lot of good work on bringing groups together from kindergarten through higher ed so that they're not just out there building silos to try to protect their own self-interest in whatever area it may be, but let's break those silos down and let's make sure that we're watching a child that begins kindergarten and let's move them through the whole process. Let's make sure that they have workforce development training through our post-secondary. Let's make sure that the classes for AP are out there and they have opportunity to go on to higher ed if that's their choosing. But there's so many things that we need to spend our dollars on that we already have in place. I guess that's what I'm trying to say.
Senator, any priorities for you or in your chamber in terms of spending? I know that the Speaker mentioned a couple things that they were going to try and get back to.
Well, one thing the Speaker mentioned, I agree with this, and I've talked to the Governor, is we're going to have a great year in revenue, but you can't tie it all up in long-term requirement. We've got to have some, what I call one-time projects. I think an ideal place to spend one-time money would be IT infrastructure, for instance. Areas that you're going to have if you go with technology. We got to be real careful. There's going to be a move to try to use it for long-term obligation, and we're going to have to discipline ourselves to understand. We haven't got into proration, Mr. Speaker, since 2010, since the rolling reserve was passed. But we need to make sure we practice fiscal policy. And let me say this: the infrastructure bill was important. It's about economic development, setting the stage. It's sending a message to the rest of the country. We're in the game. We're going to be competitive. The next challenge, it's already on us, and I hope we're not too late, is we have, based on scores, only 35% of our children reading grade level in 3rd grade. We have, on the 8th grade, I may have mentioned, or if you look at the NAEP scores, we're 49th in math, we're 46 in reading. Ladies and gentlemen, we better take it seriously, whatever we have to do to change our education system, to make changes, to correct those problems, because we will be in a bad situation if the rest of the country perceives Alabama doesn't have the skill set for the technology jobs of the future. So we have got to address this. I know I want to work with Dr. Mackey and others to do all we can. I see Terry Collins in the crowd, who has been a champion on education issues.
Senator might
have to.
Pre-K be part of that as well?
Yeah,
I see a very important person in the audience.
Pre-K is doing an excellent job. Ms. Ross is here, and I'm proud of the state and the governor providing, tens of millions of dollars to pre-K to make sure we continue that project. And all great, but all of it ties together. But we have got to understand we have a problem looming, and we better address it.
Mr. Speaker, if you could wave your magic wand and change one thing about that system that Senator Marsh mentioned in Alabama, the education system, what would be your number one priority if you had one?
Tim, that's a tough question. I think it would be a real focus on educators in the classroom. That the educators in the classroom would feel their worth of who they are as an educator, and then make sure that the children under their class would be their priority. I think the educators need to move beyond. They need to move beyond the stress of trying to cross the T's and dot the I's and look at the kids sitting in that classroom in front of them and make sure that they realize that, hey, this child's future is in my hands.
Can I answer that too?
Please do.
As I have been working the last year, all the meetings, my hope is that the education community understand the importance of coordination between the different entities of education. That we've not had it, and many times the problems higher ed may be having are directly connected to issues at K-12. They all work together, and this comprehensive plan is critical for the state to solve these problems. So my hope is continued cooperation and coordination between the different entities of education.
And that's a good way to put a bow on education, and I want to transition now to one of the bills that dropped today, out of many that dropped today, but there was a lottery proposal that dropped today. And, we talked about infrastructure and education, some of these issues that have been worked on and vetted out for years. Do you think, Mr. Speaker, that the time is right for a lottery pass in Alabama? Is that an issue that's ripe for passage?
I think so. I think it's been coming for several years. I know that the House districts that are on the border states, most of those districts have seen a significant shift over the last 7 or 8 years because they see Alabamans driving across the state line to buy lottery tickets, and people are starting to talk about it, and they're starting to make it a part of their discussion around the dinner table. And I think the infrastructure bill was a big push to address issues about the lottery, because people said, well, why can't we pass a lottery and let this be money that we could use? Of course, at the end of the day, I think there's a good push from the people. We got to make sure, though, that the lottery is something. If we're going to put this for a vote of the people, and I think it has a good chance of passing, we need to make sure that the people understand what they're voting on. That's very, very important. We don't want to cloud the issue with the definition of a lottery and try to sneak something in the back door. Let's make sure that people understand in their minds what a lottery is, and we define it in such a way that they know what they're voting on. Then I think the next big debate will be, where's the money going to go? And that will be something that